Welcome back to a new episode of Podcast on the Brink, Thursday, February 6th. We're not here to talk Super Bowl previews, although some people at this point of the IU basketball season may rather hear a Super Bowl preview than a preview of what's to come with IU basketball. But Scott Caulfield of CrimsonCast is back on Podcast on the Brink for the first time since, I think I was looking at the show log. He was last on in late September. Before we get to Scott, back when hope was alive. Before we get to Scott, want to take a moment, as always, to thank Visit Bloomington for being a proud partner of this podcast. They're also a proud partner of Indiana University Athletics. If you're ready to take your Hoosier basketball fandom to the next level, then plan your trip to Bloomington, Indiana, from iconic eats like Nick's English Hut to exploring the scenic trails of Griffey Lake. Bloomington is your gateway to all things Hoosier and beyond. Order your free visitor guide and begin planning your adventure at visitbloomington.com. Scott, you have not been on the show since Visit Bloomington has become, the presenting sponsor of Podcasts on Brink. So I got to ask, what are your go-to spots in Bloomington? I know you do like to get down to Bloomington for football games and some basketball games. Where do you like
I grew up in Bloomington, so it is second home to me, and I'm actually, after we've finished this, I'm driving down to Bloomington for some meetings. And so my places are, I love Hopscotch out on Dobbs, I think. It's over there on kind of right off of Walnut. Inkwell on the circle or on the square, on a circle, it's a square, is one of my favorite go-to spots kind of for great coffee meetings. Rainbow Bakery is kind of a really cool little hidden spot on 4th and Rogers. And then, on the way home, always try and grab some Mother Bear's pizza. I would say the times I bring my kids and my dogs, not just talk about food all the time, quietly on kind of the southwest side, the RCA Community Park Playground is awesome. I almost don't want to say it because it's a nice little playground. It's a great place to let the dogs out. But I don't want it to get too busy. It's always pretty slow there, and I like it. That's right over there, kind of on the left of like Rockport Road. Switchyard Park is also really good, but it's a little busier. So anyway, those are the places that I try and hit every time. But yeah, today I'm literally going to go to Hopscotch. I'm going to go to Inkwell. I'm probably going to grab Mother Bear's pizza for the kids on the way home. It's like I'm hitting all my spots today.
What's your favorite season in Bloomington? As someone that grew up there, and I always see Chronic Hoosier in like at the end of spring, early summer, put his tweet out with the empty streets of Kirkwood and talking about, obviously you love Bloomington when the students are there. It makes it such a great place, but he seems to be partial to the summer when it's a little bit more less traffic, more laid back. What was kind of growing up, what was your favorite time of year in Bloomington?
Yeah, I mean that's hard to beat. That's a great time. I love the spring. I love the change of seasons, and so I like all seasons. It's right now I get tired of, like, right now we're doing this February 6th. Like, I'm tired of winter. Like, I like winter when it starts, and then it's like, all right, mid-February, it's like, let's move on. I'm always like 3 weeks ready to be done with whatever season we're in. I like spring. I do like that lull when it gets quiet, but I also always kind of liked the opposite in August when you could kind of feel the buzz of town kind of picking back up. And so again, kind of the change. Once you get to like October, then it's like, damn, this place is too busy. Everyone needs to go home. But I grew up right on Atwater and Arbutus, like right by Forest Quad. I mean, right by campus. And so we were on Atwater, where it goes from kind of 2 lanes. If you go down south a little bit, if I get my bearings right, south toward like Mother Bear's by campus, it goes to 1 lane. And that was always a fun spot to kind of sit, and we just kind of watch college kids F that up and just go up the 1 lane and not know how to do 1 lane, 2 lane. Obviously you wouldn't. There's not a lot of signage in like the late 80s. So it was always kind of fun to do that. And then, you'd see kids moving in and all the trucks. And, in high school, my friends and I would just walk around campus and just talk to people who were moving in and, being stupid and trying to hit on college girls. And so like, I like the changes. Chronic's not wrong, but I think there is something to be said for kind of when the buzz gets back in the end of August, early September for Bloomington.
Yeah, I think the buzz this coming fall is probably going to be unlike any that we've seen, because obviously last fall, I don't think a lot of people knew what to expect with Kurt Signetti and IU football. And then after going and having the season that they did and what they've done in terms of recruiting and the transfer portal, and I've seen them in some early top 25s for next season, the buzz next year, you talk about some excitement. It's going to be quite a fall, I think, in Bloomington coming up. But
I agree. When you have a real early game against Illinois, like don't sleep on that game. I think we're going to start the season ranked somewhere in like the 20s, 17, 18, 19. we should be 4-0 going into that game. We're playing a cream puff schedule. Illinois also has a pretty easy schedule, and I think they're going to also be ranked in the same area. So you should have a top 25 or a top 20 ranking battle in Bloomington in our fourth game in like early September. So we'll get some fireworks real early.
For sure. Obviously not here this week on Podcast on the Brink to talk IU football. We're going to talk men's basketball. That's what.
All right, that's where I hop off. Thanks, Alex. Thanks for having me.
Okay.
Good times. Talk to you later.
So you were on, I think it was September 23rd, and we talked about preseason expectations. We talked about the talent on this team. We talked about what was to come. I think a lot of people had a lot of hope with this season. How surprised are you? We sit here on February 6th at where things stand as of today in terms of the record and just kind of the overall vibe around the program, which is not good.
Yeah, it's not. It's definitely one of the outcomes that I thought was possible. It was the biggest fear going into this season is, are we going to change the style that we're playing at all? How is this team going to mesh? And really, you look at the way this team plays with the, other teams going on runs, us going on runs, really kind of scattered, having issues with the two bigs, still giving up a lot of threes, having some issues defensively. It's all stuff that we've been saying for 4 years, Alex. So it's all stuff we saw last year. I think the hope is that you would just kind of out-talented those problems. And you got to a point where the talent was so great that it really became tough for other teams to deal with. And you see that that's still not the case. And that's really the concerning thing. I was thinking about this after the Purdue game. It's no knock on Purdue, but like outside of Braden Smith, and even then I'd wonder, like, if you were just going to pick players for like a pickup game, teams and coaches notwithstanding, like just based on talent, you probably pick like 4 or 5 IU guys before you get to your next Purdue guy. Maybe Kaufman is like who you take next, but it's like there's a ton of talent on this team. And you look at Purdue, I'm not saying they're not talented. It's just that's a system. And it's a way better team. They play way better. They know what they're doing. And you see it at the end of games where, at the end of that game, Purdue needed a bucket. They ran a play they've been running all game. I think it's funny, and then Indiana just looks lost 2 games in a row, kind of what to do. They're calling timeout. They're swapping in the Maryland game. They're not calling timeout in the Purdue game. It seems like the ball's in not the person's hands that you want at the end of the game. I'm not surprised, but it's definitely this is not the best outcome that we wanted at all.
So when you look at the record and just kind of everything that's happened, you mentioned the style of play. What are, in your mind, the biggest contributing factors for IU being in this spot? Because early in the season, we kind of had that huge red flag with the Louisville game. I think a lot of people went into that game thinking if Indiana plays its best game, this is a game they should win by 6 or 8 points, 10 points. Looking at the computer numbers going in, it was a neutral court game. Louisville, completely new team, new coach, all new players. So you didn't really have the excuse of, well, Indiana's got to work in its new players. You're playing another program that's basically been rebuilt from the ground up. They were horrible the last 2 seasons. And for Indiana to get beat like that in that game, 28 points, I think a lot of people said at that point, something's not right here. And then, I think some people probably talked themselves back into Indiana having a chance to kind of salvage the season after they had that 4-1 start in the Big Ten. But you kind of looked at the teams they were beating and said, well, they haven't got to this part of the schedule where they're going to play the best teams. This 11-game stretch that we all talked about and said, well, Indiana's probably going to need to win at least 3 or 4 of these games to give themselves a chance to stay solidly in the tournament. Obviously, that hasn't happened, but I'm just kind of curious in your mind, like what, as you've watched this unfold, can you put your finger on 1 or 2 things that you just look at and say, this has gone absolutely wrong. This is a reason why Indiana has kind of fallen off like they have.
I'm going to rephrase it because I'm not sure there's one thing that is like, I guess just maybe the mix and the way that like people play together that might be what has really gone wrong. But, when I look at it, and I know we all love looking at like Ken Palms and all the stats, it's like the team, and I have a 12-year-old kid, so I'll use some of his language. It's like all across the board, they're just mid. Like they are average in a lot of things. They're not really good at like anything. And they are really bad in some things. The 3-point shooting percentage has dipped down. This is the worst 3-point shooting percentage team under Mike Woodson. They're now shooting 32.2%, which isn't last year was 32.4. So they've never been a great 3-point shooting team. They're shooting there's all these inconsistencies when you look at the numbers. So this is the worst shooting team from 3-point percentage wise. This is also the team that has the most attempts percentage wise of any team under Mike Woodson at 32.9%. So it's they're shooting the 3 worst, but they're shooting it more. But I hate to say look at Purdue, but you look at Purdue, this year their offensive efficiency is they're 7th in the country. Last year they were 4th. The year before they were 12th. Before that they were 2nd. Then even before you have the Zach Edey years, in 2019 they were 4th. In 2018 they were 2nd. To me, that's I think what is really the most concerning thing is not that what are we bad at? It's what are we elite at? Because we're not elite at anything. If you want to be where I as an IU fan want us to be, and where I think we all want this team to be, you need to be in the top 10 in the country in something. Is it offense? Is it defense? Is it shooting? Is it rebounding? What are you? And I think I know I'm kind of dancing around it, but it's to me the question really is over 4 years, what is this team's identity? What are they really, really, really good at? And I don't know what that is. And I think that's part of the problem, because if you don't know that and you don't have that, you're not going to be winning a Big Ten. You're not going deep in the tournament because teams will expose you. And I think that's really the problem is after, even Tom Crean, like him or hate him, it's that team was about offense. They were just going to put up points. They weren't going to play defense, and he was going to really recruit raw talent that he thinks could be the next Dwayne Wade or Oladipo. Even under Archie Miller, it's we're going to do, pack line defense, and we're going to focus more on defense and not offense. Okay, it didn't work. This is kind of the most perplexing of all, because I guess it's just we're going to be a big man offense is kind of what we're known for, but we're not even good at that. So I think that's the problem is there's nothing that glares we suck at this. It's just there's also nothing that glares that we are just elite at something.
Yeah, and I think if you now that we kind of have the ability to go back and look at the first couple of years and last season and what we've seen this season, I think in many ways Trayce Jackson-Davis those first 2 years kind of covered up a lot of the deficiencies of the overall plan, because the whole argument the first 2 years was, well, Trayce Jackson-Davis is on the team, of course you're going to throw him the ball, and he was a really good player Mike Woodson's first year, but his second year, go look at the Ken Palm Player of the Year rankings. He was the third best player in the country that year, according to Ken Palm. He's gone on to be obviously a really good NBA player, but since he's been gone from the program, I think I saw a stat that Indiana's not beaten a ranked team without Trayce Jackson-Davis on the roster. Last year, obviously they had a really good player in Khalil Ware. He's now, I think, the odds-on favorite to win NBA Rookie of the Year. Not a great crop of rookies in the NBA, but he's really come on here the last month or so and played really well for Miami. And then this year, they bring in a different kind of a big man with Oumar Ballo and try to feature him more. But you're right. It's the other night was a perfect example of this. Wisconsin knew that Indiana wanted to go to Ballo repeatedly, and they basically took that away. There's been other games like that. The Nebraska game kind of rings a bell in early December, where Nebraska just said, we're going to make you beat us from the three-point line. We're not going to let Oumar Ballo do anything in the post. So Indiana's kind of gone from a team that could beat you with its post play the first couple of years under Trayce Jackson-Davis to a team now in the last couple of years doesn't really have that strong identity, that strong go-to part of its game that it can rely on consistently on a game-to-game basis. I don't think there was too many examples the first couple of years where teams could just completely take Trayce Jackson-Davis out of the game. They've been able to do that the last couple of years, and I don't think Indiana really has a strong counter to that when they can't get to that. The other thing is,
well, I'm going to jump in real
go
quick
ahead.
on that.
Go ahead.
And the analogy I've been kind of using, if you're older, you'll get this. If you're younger, go back and get an emulator and play the original Tecmo Bowl. Tecmo Bowl is a great football game, but you would have 4 offensive plays and 4 defensive plays. You'd up and A would be your offense, and down and B would be your defense. If you pick the right defense, you would just stop the offense. No matter what, if you had Joe Montana, you had a shotgun play. If you had the shotgun defense, you stopped it. If you didn't, you were giving up 30 yards. And it feels like that is what our games are, in that, against Wisconsin, Wisconsin had the right defense to start the game. And it's like, oh, we got it. Like, boom, we're going to go on a 24-6 run. Like, bang, 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 stop. And they go on a run. The other is like Northwestern. That game was pretty good. Indiana ends the first half on an 18-2 run. But you saw what Chris Collins was doing. Like, they were pushing the ball inside. Then they made adjustments. It's like they came out after halftime. And it's like, oh, we found the other defense. And then then they go on, like, I think it was like a 12-2 run and then a 16-2 run and the game's over. And this is where, to maybe answer your first question, where we really are poor is there doesn't seem to be coaching adjustments or massive ones during the game. And it does really feel like the other teams are just doing the Tecmo Bowl defense of like, we'll try something to start the game. And if we go on a run, it's like, it's Wisconsin. That's great. Like, now we're done and we can just kind of run out the string. If it doesn't work, I'll do an adjustment at the 10-minute mark. I'll do an adjustment at halftime. Like, we have 4 adjustments and one of them is going to be right. And then once it's right, we'll just bang the heck out of it and we'll go on a 24-2 run. And you just don't see a lot of massive adjustments with the way that Indiana plays. The guys change. Woodson changed the starting lineup for the game against Wisconsin and then played the exact same. And I think that is really frustrating, is you just don't see any adjustments at all.
Yeah, and you also see a lot of examples of Indiana playing better without the 2 bigs, and he's now gone back to the 2 big starting lineup.
Yeah.
I don't know if it's stubbornness, if it's just habit, but to me, when you're in this situation of the season where you desperately need wins and you can't afford to spot a team a huge run in an important game like Wisconsin, just because you want to start this 2 big lineup, and it was clear that lineup didn't work. They played better when they went to the 1 big lineup. Obviously, though, when you dig yourself a 20-point hole, you're not going to be able to get out of that. That's just one of the other things that's been a little curious to me as I've watched this season unfold, is there was a stretch there where they were forced to kind of go away from the 2 big lineup with Malik Reneau being out. And then the minute he's back and available, even the Northwestern game, I thought he played Reneau more than he needed to. He was clearly not healthy. And every possession in games like these, when it's close, a Northwestern, a Purdue, a Maryland, every game, every possession counts, and you can't just punt away possessions and say, "Oh, no big deal. 5 or 6 possessions, we'll toss them in there. Maybe they go on an 8-0 run, we can recover from that." You look at just repeatedly, Indiana gives up these long runs from the other team. It's really hard when you're not a great, elite team capable of punching back all the time to overcome that stuff.
Yeah. And, the thing with the 2 big lineup that I've been thinking about too is, and this is, I mean, I hate knocking the players because I know they're just NIL money, but it's like they're still 19, 20, 21 years old. I look at this as kind of a failure of roster construction because I look at Miles Rice, and the more I watch him, and I have a couple friends who I've been talking about with this, it's like, it feels like everything he's able to do well or at an elite level is nullified by having 2 bigs. Like, Miles Rice is quick, fast, and it's like he should be running an old, like, the Phoenix Suns offense of like 7 seconds or less. Like, he should be moving the ball. He can't do it. That's not the way our offense runs. I look at Mackenzie Mbako, who always feels like he's got 3 people. Like, it's like this people around him. The few times he's open in space, like there was one time he had a break against Purdue, had a great little spin and a dunk. And like, when he's in open space, he looks really unbelievably athletic. He just can't do any of that because everything's jammed up. And I'm not saying like, oh, it's a 2 big lineup. I'm just like, if you're going to go get Ballo and you have Reneau, maybe you do a roster construction where like, all right, Miles Rice looks awesome, but like what he does doesn't work for what we need. We need a shoot first point guard who's maybe slower and more, doesn't have as many, turnovers. And, maybe you just get different types of players that complementary fit this. It's like we almost have these 2 different teams. We have a team that like almost should just play with no bigs. And we have like the, Mbako and Rice and those guys in one bucket. And then you have like your big team over here where you have guys like, Trey Galloway, who's not like, a traditional, like, fast point guard, Ballo and Reneau. And it's like you have these 2 teams that shouldn't be jammed together. It doesn't. Yeah. It feels like just odd roster construction. It's kind of like Woodson just went out and got like, who are the highest priced guys we can get, and let's put it all together. And then let's see if it works. And it's like, it doesn't work that way.
Yeah. Rice is, I think one reason, people have some fans have been critical of him recently, just based on his numbers and how he's played. I think part of the problem with him is this system and the way they're playing does not fit him at all.
Right.
He needs, in particular, you see him try to do this sometimes in transition, but he's so unsure of himself now because things have gone so terribly wrong. But he can push the pace in transition and get buckets like that. But when there's a guy posting up on the break every time, there's two guys in the paint, it's hard to go in there and shoot layups. You look at his film last year from Washington State, he was getting a ton in transition. He was scoring at the rim at a high percentage. And now the rim is, or excuse me, the paint is completely clogged up because of these, the two bigs in there. It takes away a huge strength of his offense. He's not necessarily a pass first point guard. He's a guy that can go get some points in transition. I know his 3-point shooting has not been great, but I just agree with what you're saying there in terms of the style of play. It doesn't necessarily fit with him. And then the other thing is, I think a lot of people expected Kanan Carlisle to be a far more reliable contributor than what we've seen. He's been just below, you want to use like a baseball term, like replacement level player. He's been far below replacement level. He's been unplayable at times. He's had a couple of games where he's been obviously serviceable, but he's not looked at all like a guy who scored 35 points last season in a game against Arizona as a freshman and won National Player of the Week. We've seen nothing like that. I mean, that's one of the main reasons now that Anthony Leal is playing so much is that there's really no other option on this roster. And I think Woodson, in many ways, has kind of embraced Leal from the standpoint of we at least know what we're going to get from him on a game-to-game basis. We know he's not going to go out there and try to do anything too much or make mistakes. And the backcourt, I mean, there's problems across the roster. I mean, you can kind of go through every guy. I mean, besides Umar Ballo, I think every guy you can look at and say, from a production standpoint, things have been inconsistent. But I just think the guard and the wing play. I guess another guy I'd throw in there in terms of being pretty consistent and pretty reliable will be Luke Goody. But in terms of his role, but everyone else, it's hard to overcome so many deficiencies in so many areas.
Well, and the thing that I'll say about Ballos, he's been great the last couple of games, but we brought this up on the last podcast. Since we started this losing streak, but I'm going to go back to when he came back after Winthrop. So he didn't play against Winthrop. Here's his minutes played. Now, up until this point in his career, he's never three games. He played more than 30 minutes in a row, 3 games in a row, his entire career. Here's the minute log since Winthrop: 32, 32, 33, 24, 34, 40, 36, 39, 35, and then 26 against Wisconsin. And if that game would have been closer, he probably would have paid 35. It's like, you can't run him. Like, and he looks worn out. He looks tired at end of games. He's giving maximum effort, and he's been playing great. His offensive efficiency has been over 100 in like 5 of those games. There's no history in his play log that he can go 5 games in a row with 30 plus minutes. And it's like having a car and you're running it in the red. Like, this is not sustainable for him. And what's really frustrating for me is I go back to that Rutgers, Penn State, USC run of games where you played him 32, 32, and 33 minutes. You kind of had to win some of those games. Like, that's the problem, is those are games you probably should have played him 17 to 20 minutes, given him a rest, knowing that this Purdue, Wisconsin, Michigan, Michigan State run, like, this is when you can run him hard right now. Like, right now is when you probably could go 30, 35 minutes a game, a couple in a row. You can't do it on the back of doing 40 minutes against Ohio State and 36 against Northwestern. Like, it's kind of understanding the schedule you have ahead of you as well. It's like, we're coming into this tired and worn out in a period we need to be as fresh as, like, this is the season right here. These 4 games are the season. The problem is you pissed a lot of it away, and you've also like worn everybody out coming into it.
Yeah, so I'm curious. I know you guys have, I don't want to say shied away, but you've tried to keep the focus on the court, and we've tried to do that too here with Podcasts on the Brink. But I feel like we're getting to the point now with, I think, less than 5 weeks till the Big Ten tournament, and the fan base kind of knows. They've watched, they've seen this season play out with the whole coaching situation. I'm curious, just from your point of view. I mean, you've watched Indiana basketball for a long time, and it's kind of a loaded question, so you may have to think about this for a second. Why do you think this program continues to end up back in the same spot? Because I feel like 4 years ago at this time, we could have had the same conversation, right, about Archie Miller. Maybe the circumstances were different. Maybe the players were obviously different. The results were different. How they lost games was different. But the reality is, we're in the same spot, having the same conversation 4 years later. Tom Crean obviously had a much longer shelf life. He accomplished far more than what Archie Miller or Mike Woodson will have accomplished when they're 10 years in. Um, I think a lot of people right now would take having some of the results of Tom Crean winning 2 Big Ten titles in 4 seasons. That seems like a pretty strong showing based on what we've seen over this last 8 seasons. But in many ways, the only thing that's been consistent for Indiana basketball over the last 25 plus years is inconsistency, right? There's been no baseline success. There's been no identity that they've hung their hat on. I mean, the fans have been there. They've supported this program through thick and thin. I think that's one reason why so many people are frustrated. They know the potential of this program. They know the resources that are thrown in. They know the time. They know the money that they put in to pay to go to games, to go on these bucket list trips like Atlantis, like going to Las Vegas, going to Allen Fieldhouse, paying for tickets, paying for parking. And I sympathize with those fans. You're one of them, Scott. I mean, I don't pay for tickets when I go. I get a press pass, but I think everyone just wants a healthy, thriving program, and it's frustrating for a lot of people that it gets back to the same point. Is this just bad luck in terms of making bad hires? Is it something more than that? And maybe it's not even a question that any of us can answer, because if we knew the answer, then maybe we wouldn't be in this spot. But I just think it's frustrating for a lot of people that it's kind of like a circle, right? You get a new coach, there's excitement for a couple of years, a couple of things go right, and then all of a sudden the backslide continues, and now it just feels like we're at the end of another failed tenure for an IU coach.
Yeah, I mean, the thing I've been saying is, like, I'm pissed too. Like, yeah, as a fan, as an alumnus, as someone who's been a varsity club member for 20 plus years and had season tickets, I'm pissed. Like, I really am at the entire thing, because I love March. I grew up, Indiana was in March Madness. It was awesome. I'd have friends over. We'd watch. I'd get to pick my bracket. I get to pick Indiana. What a thought. Like, I could write down Indiana in a second round game. And, I keep saying I'm not that old. Every year I get older, man. It just happens. I've been out of college 25 years now. And this is another year where basically we're just kind of punting and waiting until April for something to happen. I don't need to go to the laundress. It happened with, Knight, Davis, Sampson, all these years. Like, I thought about it. It's like, this is the 6th time this has happened in 26 years. It's like 20% of my life. I just haven't been able to enjoy March. Like, I've just been waiting for March to be over, which sucks. But to your question, it's like, why are we here? I think it's a combination of a lot of things. I look at it this way, in that I think it's just an inability to make quick decisions. So here's what I mean by that is, when they went through the cycle hiring Archie, I stand by this. I will die on this hill. That was the best hire in that cycle. Archie Miller, there's nothing different between Archie Miller and like Nate Oates in their couple of years. Archie Miller, you could say, probably had a better career in Dayton than Nate Oates had at Buffalo. I'm just picking 2 examples. Like, Nate Oates at Buffalo didn't go to an Elite 8. Archie Miller did. Like, Archie Miller had a team that 2 years later had Obi Toppin and was ranked in the top 5. Like, he had that program humming. There was nothing that said, you give this guy more resources, he's not going to turn into an awesome coach. That was the right hire in that cycle. Again, he fit the profile of a young up-and-coming coach who could turn around a program. It didn't work. Why? Like, I don't know. Why do some coaches work and some don't? Like, the other one in that cycle was Chris Holtman, also hit a lot of the check boxes, also didn't work. Why didn't they work, but others did? Like, that's a question I don't think you can answer. I look at it differently, in that if we're all being honest with ourselves, by year 2 in Archie, we're like, ooh, this is not working.
Game one.
Yeah, it's not working. And then you give it 4 years. To me, that's the problem. It's like, we talk about football. It's like, why don't you just hire Signetti a couple of years? It's like, that's not that easy. Like, if everyone knew what the next Signetti, everyone would hire him. there's more of an alchemy in who's going to work. To me, what you can control is what are you going to do time-wise. So I look at programs that like take this, I don't want to curse on them, like take this S seriously. It's what I always say. Take this program seriously. You look at North Carolina. They hire Matt Doherty in 2002. He had in 2002, that team is not good. They're 8-20. Okay. Second year, they get better. They're 19-16. They make the NIT. They're 6-10 in the conference. He's a former alumnus. They fire him after 2 years. 2 years. None of this, oh, you need 3. Like, oh, we're getting better. I mean, you could make a lot of, hey, man, that team got better. That team beat Duke the last game of the season. There's a lot of ways you could explain away giving him one more year. They didn't. They took it seriously. They hired Roy Williams, and they got a title. An even better example is Kentucky. I hate Kentucky, but Kentucky hires Billy Gillispie in 2008. That team goes 18-11 in the regular season. They make the NCAA tournament. They lose in the first round. They make the tournament. 18-11. They're 12-4 in the SEC in his first year. Second year, they go 22-14. They are 8-8 in the SEC. They make the NIT, and they fire him. But like, those are programs that take it seriously. They're like, we're not like, and I'm not, they ended up hiring Calipari. They won a title. There is none of this like, hey man, dude, he won 22 games last year. He went to the NCAA tournament. None of that. And so to me, I think that's where Indiana has failed. Whether Archie is or isn't the right choice to me is like, that's not a question you can ask. Because if we look at all of the young coaches that people are, stewing up as possible options, like are they going to work? I don't know. Because there's guys that I've looked at, like Andy Enfeld at what was it? Florida Gulf Coast. Yeah,
he was then went to USC.
Yeah, and it's like he had an unbelievable run in the tournament. Was running this like crazy offense. Like, dude, that looks interesting. It's like, no, it doesn't work. Like, some guys work, some guys don't. I think the failure is taking too long to make that decision, and it's like Indiana has this like 4 or 5 years is the gestation period. It's like, to me, it's 2 years. And it might even be less. So that would be my push is if we have a coaching change, that's fine. Throw your chips in, pick who you think is right. That's kind of the crapshoot roulette wheel. But then it becomes a business decision. And then you have to know. And I think everyone who was looking at it too, you knew it with Archie, like you said, in game 1, but you knew it by the end of year 2. We're having these discussions. Same thing with Woodson after year 2. It's like, man, we have a hard cap on this because we're making the tournament. We are getting just throttled in our games. Last year, there was a lot of chatter about it. Nope, we'll do the safe thing and wait. It's like that. That, I think, are some of the problems. I mean, you can go back, but, they gave Crean's is just a different example because there were so many extenuating circumstances. But I even go one step back. Just I think the history is important to IU. IU just sometimes they just haven't taken it seriously or made decisions that make a lot of sense. Like Sampson, in retrospect, is a really interesting pivot point for Indiana because he was both the right and the wrong hire. And so what I mean is, like, from a basketball perspective, he's the right hire. He's shown he can coach. He can build a program. He's doing it. Houston, go look at his numbers. I'm going to take a second to pull this up. Like Sampson was at 08. That team, when he got fired, was what, like 24-4 and 13-2 in the Big Ten? That's in his year 2. He could do it. The trouble was, you knew when you hired him, it's like, this guy is playing in the gray. Like, you knew that. And it's like, IU doesn't play in the gray. And so it's like, if you're going to hire him, you either got to play in the gray or not hire him. Like, you can't do, like, he came and he did exactly what he did is look stupid in retrospect, but it's like, he did what Sampson does. It's like Siegfried and Roy, the magicians who got his head bit off by a lion. It's not like they didn't do it. It's like, dude, a lion just started lioning. Like, a lion was like, hey, I'm going to bite your head because I'm a lion. That's what I do. It's like, that's what Sampson did. I don't even blame Sampson anymore. I blame IU. It's like, you hired him. This is what he does. He wins and he plays in the gray. And so, I don't know. It's a very long answer, but I think whatever Indiana does next, they need to be decisive. And on the flip side, I think they are, because you look at like what they did. Signetti is like, on the flip side, Signetti is working, and Dolson didn't F around with that either. He's like, great, we're going to extend you. Your defensive coordinator is getting sniffs. We're going to give him a $2 million contract. Like, we are not going to mess around either way. I just think that has to be the ethos as the next coach who comes in. It's like, all right, man, you got an 18-month mandate. Like, figure it out. And if you haven't gotten it done, like, yeah, we'll start moving a lot faster on this stuff.
Especially in the transfer portal era where you see these tenures where Pat Kelsey's a great example at Louisville. I talked about him earlier, but he came in. They don't have more talent than Indiana. They came in and bought a whole new roster out of the portal. I mean, they got Chucky Hepburn. How many people last spring were like, well, Chucky Hepburn's going to be one of the best point guards in the country this year. That's a huge pickup for Louisville. I think going into the season, Louisville's thought best case scenario, we make it into the tournament. Now they're talking about getting a 5 or a 6 seed. They've obviously the ACC is not what it usually is, but they've pretty much been dominant in that league. I think they've lost 2 conference games all season. That's an example of you find and that's just one of countless examples around the country where programs, Brad Underwood's another example. He took a little bit of time to get it going at Illinois, but he was the same cycle as Archie and Chris Holtman. When that happened, I don't think a lot of people were like, well, Brad Underwood's the best hire of the cycle. He was probably viewed universally as the 3rd best in that cycle. He's turned out the best. So you don't know how it's going to work out in the long term. The other thing I'll say, going back to Crean, one of the reasons that he, I think, got more time, obviously the first 3 years were a disaster based on what he inherited, and it was different circumstances. If that would have been the transfer portal era, he could have rebuilt that thing in a year or two, much easier. But he had to rebuild it from ground zero. But you also saw a much higher potential ceiling for what Crean could do. He won a couple of Big Ten titles. He got a number 1 seed in the NCAA tournament. He obviously lost to Syracuse in the tournament, but it wasn't a good performance. But the year before that, they played Kentucky to a really competitive game in the Sweet 16. They had wins over really good programs. They had just a lot of moments where they looked the part of an elite program. That was never the case under Archie, and it's really never been the case under Mike Woodson. I mean, they've had some wins over Purdue. They've had some ranked wins. But has there ever been a stretch of basketball for Indiana basketball under Mike Woodson where Indiana's been dominant for weeks on end, or they've just bullied people? It's been every time they've gotten to a high leverage situation, whether it be the neutral court games, whether it be the NCAA tournament games, whether it be some of these Big Ten. I mean, the Big Ten tournament last year was a perfect example. They sneak past Penn State, which should never be the case for Indiana basketball. And then Nebraska, I think, beats them by 27 in the second game of the Big Ten tournament. Not competitive at all. There's been too many examples of that. And you're right. A lot of people now are kind of throwing it in the face of IU, like, well, a move should have been made last season. But the justification was, well, he made the tournament the first couple of years. We can go out and get a better team. And I think a lot of people bought back in because they saw the talent. And now the results are pretty. I mean, how much different is this than last season in terms of what Indiana put on the court? Not that. I mean, the Ken Palm ranking might be 20 or 30 spots higher, but the end result's not going to be any different.
Yeah, it's the same. We're scrounging to try and get to the bubble. I mean, the thing that to pin it back to Woodson, the thing that I've been frustrated with, and I thought about after his comments after the Wisconsin game. I don't dig into every press conference, but it's like after the Wisconsin game, he kind of blamed some of the players. Like, man, the effort wasn't there. They need to play harder. Renew and Ballo, like, they've got to play better. And I'm thinking to myself, like, who else are we going to blame next? Like, so at the end of last season, you kind of blame the fans. It's like, there's true fans, there's not true fans. Like, all right, so you blame the fans. Awesome. Like, check mark. Cool. I love that. As a fan, love hearing that from a former player. Like, that was not the idea of bringing a guy back, but whatever. You do that. You did it. Then, you said after the Louisville game, you're blaming the fact that it's the roster and they need time to put together. Now you're blaming the players. I'm like, when do you blame yourself? Like, you're playing the blame game. Like, who else is left to blame before you get to yourself at any point here? Because that's the thing that I haven't heard a lot of that would be nice to hear is, hey man, like, I need to step it up. I've got to do better in end of game situations. I've got to figure this out. Instead of just, oh man, Maryland started playing zone. What you going to do? It's like, well, you're going to have a play for that. You're like, I don't know. You're going to do something, but no other team seems this discombobulated at the end of game situations. And the thing we talked about those last 2 games, the Maryland and Purdue game, is I'm assuming they practice it. I was joking. This is always the thing when under Crean, there was a lot of talk about, man, he looks great in practice. It's like, well, it looks like crap in the game. So what's like, I can't see practice, but like, I'm sure they practice end of game situation, but all I can do is see what I see in the games, and it doesn't look like you do. Like, it doesn't look like you practice it at all. So either you're not practicing it or you're practicing it wrong, because we've had 2 end of game situations and they were both vastly different and they both vastly looked just unbelievably stupid. The Purdue one was galling because, like, I know I'm bouncing around topics here. Sorry, but like the Purdue one that drove me nuts was, a lot of people are like, man, you need an end of game play. You need to have a play drawn up. It's like, Purdue didn't have an end of game play. That little pin down, pass to the post, Kaufman wasn't exactly where he wanted to be. That's a play they've been running all game. Like, that's just a play. No end, like, that's just a play. Like, you don't need to have, like, oh, here's our massive end of game play. Just when you have the ball with 8 seconds, you're bringing it up, just run a play. Like, just run one of your plays. But that's the thing, is like, I don't think it's really an NBA style go get it yourself. They have a couple of plays, they have a couple of pin downs, they have a couple of little motions, but it's like, hey man, you got the ball, you got 9 seconds, go get it, bro. And that works in the NBA when you have Carmelo Anthony. That works in the NBA when you have a facilitator like Tyrese Halliburton. It doesn't always work in college, and this team, it's not working. I think that's the trouble, is like, this is not working, and yet we're still running the exact same offense we were running 4 years ago.
Yeah, the other thing you mentioned kind of with Woodson in terms of the accountability, I mean, he does say things like, it's on me, I got, occasionally, but he also says things like, well, you ask him like about a specific, this is kind of more of a media thing, but ask him about kind of what's gone wrong. He says things like, we got to keep working on it. The getting over the hump thing, I think people is kind of like a joke now for fans to hear that, because he said that there's been a couple times in the last couple weeks he's been asked something. He said, I wish I knew, I can't explain it. And I'm like, this is year 4 of your tenure, and you should be able to put your finger on kind of what's going wrong and fix it. And to continuously say, I wish I knew, I got to keep working. Like, what exactly are you working on? I think that's a thing for a lot of people, where they're just like, they've lost confidence in his ability to make changes and fix anything. And I think that's when you kind of get the sense of when you're at the end of the line for somebody, when it's just kind of like, Fortune 500 company, right? There's a CEO running the company, and the stock price the last 2 quarters is underperformed. The shareholders are getting less dividend. People are worried about their returns, their long-term, they lose confidence in the leadership of the company. And I think that's where IU fans are now with this program and the leadership of the program. They're being, that's him communicating with the fan base in these post-game press conferences, and he's being asked questions about what's gone wrong and what needs to be fixed, and he's not addressing or fixing the issue. And I think that's a huge problem from a PR perspective.
Well, I think it's just also, it feels like he's just a little bit not fully understanding. It's personal opinion. Like, some of this is not his fault. And what I mean by that is, I mean, it's been a crappy 25 years. Like, since that Final Four run, you mentioned, like, when we've been dominant, like, in the last 20 years, when has been like a 12-month period we've just been dominant? It's like that one period under Crean, those 2-year stretches. But I would even venture, like, the beginning of that first year was kind of like, whoa, this is happening. And then, they beat Kentucky. But even that first year against Kentucky, I'm pulling up the stats now. Here they beat Kentucky. They still lost 3 in a row in the middle of the Big Ten. Like, at one point they were 4-5 in the Big Ten. That wasn't all just a great, amazing season. And the year they were ranked number 1, I remember at the end of the year, they have that game against Ohio State to lock up the Big Ten title, like, do it at home, and they lose. Like, there was moments you're like, man, this doesn't feel right. They lose in the Big Ten tournament. Like, yeah, so give it 12 months. You had 12 months where it's like, I felt like, damn, we have one of the best teams in the country. We are kicking ass. In 20 years, we've had 12 months of that. So, like, all of this kind of anger and annoyance, it adds up. And if you're the coach at Indiana, like, that's baggage. You pick up baggage when you take this job, and it's baggage of mistakes in the past that were different athletic directors, different presidents, both university and UF, just like different everything. It's like, but it adds up. It's not like you can't just wipe the slate clean. Like, okay, woo, 20. Like, all right, we're gonna start fresh. And like, I'm still annoyed at the loss to Syracuse. I'm still annoyed that we didn't make the tournament in 2017. Like those are real years. They happened to Scott Caulfield. Like I paid for tickets that year. I think that's the struggle. I mean, the flip side is if you figure it out, it's going to be awesome. Like when Crean got it rolling, he was the talk of the town. He had the number one team in the country. You have a high paying job. Like it's awesome. You can figure it out. That's the plus side. The negative side is like, yeah, you're picking up a lot of baggage. And I think that's what it feels like. All I can sense is the feel, but it just, the vibes are very much Woodson's like, man, why is everyone getting so worked up? I made the tournament the last 2 years. Like that's what it felt like at the end of senior night last year. He's like, man, come on, man. Like I made the tournament 2 years in a row. It's like, this is more than just your run. This is a 20-year run of us. You know, we haven't made the tournament 3 years in a row since what was like 01, 02, 03. Like that's insane. And like, I will say this, the next couple of weeks could be tough. You're going to hear stuff in the media like about IU fans and, you know, they're being unrealistic, all this stuff. Like I urge everyone to just take a breath. Don't listen to it. Cause I'm like, go take North Carolina. Like go give them 20 years where they miss the tournament 12 times out of 20 years and never make a Sweet 16. Like then let's come back in 2044. Let's see how their pulse is. Let's see how they're hanging out. How are things rolling in Chapel Hill? Like, let's see how Kentucky's doing. Have Kentucky miss the tournament every year, you know, 80% of the years over the next 20 years. Like, let's see how they're doing in 20 years. Like this idea of like, man, you know, Alabama was pissed for 2 years. It's like, we've been in the wilderness forever. And so there's a lot of built up resentment. And I mean, I'm leading into just, you know, the next couple of home games are going to be rough. They're just are. It's going to be a funky atmosphere. You know, everyone's saying like, I don't boo. I'm just not a booer, so I'm not going to boo fans. I'm not going to boo things. But, you know, if you've been paying money and you're pissed, whatever. Like, there's a lot of built-up anger. People are pissed. And I also feel like Indiana fans, I think there's a world where they feel like they also haven't really been heard and listened to. And it's I don't know what the answer to this is, but there is resentment of 20 years of paying top dollar prices for all of this stuff and getting just minimal results. And I don't know what the answer is because the athletic department needs that money. I don't know what else they sell on. They have to sell on tradition and banners because you can't sell on NIT. But it's like this is the bill coming due of 20 years of that. Is people are pissed, and I get it. I've been paying for tickets for 20 years, and I've not been getting what I've been paying for. That's the funny thing. People aren't pissed in football because football was a deal. I could get parking, 4 tickets for me, my wife, my 2 kids for the entire season for like $800. And like, that was a deal. That gets you nothing at Assembly Hall.
Yeah. Yeah. I mentioned this, I don't know, it was a couple weeks ago on the podcast, that one of the kind of the more annoying things I think that happens around this inevitable divorce for an IU coach and the coaching searches. There's people who aren't stakeholders in the program, people from the outside that like to come in and kind of throw shots at the fan base and act like it's a fan base problem. I mean, obviously, in any fan base, there's people who are unreasonable. There's people that do things that aren't reflective of the majority of the fans who do support the program in good faith and do want the best for the program. But it's like, how do you expect Indiana fans to feel at this point? Do you expect people to just be happy and thrilled that this is another season where it looks like, at best case, let's say they figure out a way to win 4 or 5 more games and sneak into the first 4 in Dayton, or they, win an NCAA. It still is not meeting the expectations of what has kind of been, portrayed or given to them going into the season by the coach and the people in charge. So it's not a good situation. The good thing is, I'll remind everybody, 5 weeks from now is the Big Ten tournament. So whatever's going to happen here the rest of the way, it'll be a pretty swift resolution. There's probably going to be some pain points here the next couple of weeks in terms of games, but I'm sure, Scott, you and Galen will have it all covered over on CrimsonCast. We'll have it covered here on Podcast on the Brink. Scott, it's always good to catch up with you. I wish it were under one of these years. We may be closer to retirement, but we'll have an NCAA tournament run to break down here on the podcast.
Oh my God, let's do it. We're in the Elite Eight. I mean, and that's the thing. We can still get there. Like, I know it sucks. I'm not happy. I'm not trying to like be Mr. Positive here, but I want to always end on a trying to end on a positive. I feel like we've been super negative. Like, on a positive note is like there's nothing inherent, like the idea of like, oh, the program's dead, they can't do it. It's like, no, this is still a really good job. And when I've seen polling of, Big Ten coaches, and it's like Indiana's still an elite job, and it still pays like an elite job. It's the idea of like, oh man, who would want to go there? It's like a lot of people. Like a lot of people would want to go here. And it just takes getting the right coach to turn things around quickly. You saw it with football. You see it in other places all around the country. Alabama had no history of basketball success. Nate Oates gets there. He has a system that works, that fits that university. And then you're off to the races. And so I think, and if this is something I'm kind of stealing from Ryan, my compatriot on Assembly Call, but he's been talking about, IU's been looking back too much. And when you look back, you run into things. And so I think this is also kind of this is a good break point that I don't think Indiana's been haunted by Bob Knight or this and that, but it's like, all right, we tried the former player thing. It's like, this is now to me, like the cleanest break of we can still keep tradition. We don't need to get rid of candy stripe pants, but just fresh slate, man. Like we are a top tier program that needs a new coach. Like all that other stuff it's done. Like we are just the program that needs a coach. We don't need all of this excess background baggage, which I feel like has always been there. You go to Davis, and like we said, we kind of rehashing it, but like you go to Crean, it's like Crean's not bringing in the old players. Like just to me, it's like this is the perfect end point to all of that. It's like, all right, we did it all. We had a Woodson guy, like we had a Knight guy, we had Woodson. Like now, boom. Like let's all look forward.
Yeah, appreciate the history. Be thankful for everything that happened in the past, but at some point you have to let go of some of those things and move forward. And it needs to be a new era for Indiana basketball, whether that's somebody that has ties to the program in the past or not. It has to be. They've never really wiped the slate fully clean. It needs to be a reboot. And that's just the reality of the situation. Whenever the time comes to make a change, it needs to be a fresh start, and hopefully people can be excited about the future again. And who knows, you never know how it's going to work out, but it's clearly not working out at this point. So Scott, again, appreciate the time.
Thank you,
Everyone check out CrimsonCast. Him and Galen do a terrific job. I think they've even sprinkled in some football content here in the off season if you want to listen to something that's a little bit more positive. Of course, Indiana has a game coming up this weekend. Should be an interesting scene. Hoosiers hosting Michigan before traveling to Michigan State next week. Then they host UCLA. Then they host Purdue. So a ton of tough games coming up. If this stretch that they've already gone through hasn't been tough enough, it's just going to continue to be tough over the next 4 games. We'll be here, of course, as always, covering it on podcast, on the Brink, and on Inside the Hall. If you enjoy the show, please leave us a rating and a review over on Apple Podcasts. Leave us a 5-star rating on Spotify, and we'll be back soon with another episode of Podcast on the Brink.